Спасибо за ваш интерес к работе в России.
Thank you for working in Russia, for your interest
Экономического форума.
to
Кстати говоря, мы
to St. Petersburg International Economic Forum.
интерес
By the way,
не только
we noted
сокращается из года в год, но наоборот
that you are getting increasingly interested in the forum. The number of publications this year, as well as the number of information materials
о работе
on
Петербургского
St. Petersburg
форума
Economic Forum
больше, чем
increased
предыдущие годы.
in comparison to the previous year
Очень радует.
and
У нас очень хорошие контакты состоялись
several years before.
с нашими
We are
партнерами.
delighted to note that progress, and we are maintaining good contacts with our partners in many areas, in many industry sectors. I've just had a very substantive meeting with the heads of the biggest world
Энергетического комплекса.
companies working in the fuel and energy sector. I believe that the session is coming to an end
Мировой энергетики.
right now, and they are still discussing the energy situation in the world. They are sharing their ideas on what we could do to stabilize the world energy market. During the meeting, I also asked them to voice their
В целом, мы удовлетворены
offers
тем,
to
как
Russia
наша работа
to speak about what they could suggest in this area. In general, we are satisfied
годами уже
with
работает,
the
в России.
efforts that are taken in this area. Many of our partners have been working in Russia for a long time
Имеют в
already.
своих балансах достаточно большие запасы, что повышает капитализацию
And
компаний,
They have
облегчает им доступ на финансовые
high
рынки.
capitalization, which makes the access to financial markets even easier.
Некоторые представители российской части аудитории обратились с просьбой
Some Russian companies
по дальнейшему
voiced
совершенствованию
a request
российского законодательства
related to further improvement of the
в фискальном вопросе.
Russian
В ближайшее
legislation,
время мы обсудим это
including the legislation related to
в начале июня.
tax regulation. We are going to discuss that in the beginning of July.
Сегодняшней встречи
As for our today's meeting, I'd like to say one more time
тому,
that
что вы проявляете интерес к работе с нами.
we are very glad to know that you're increasingly interested
Коллегу, господина
in
Михайлова,
forum, and now I'd like to congratulate your colleague Mr. Mikhailov. Today is 110th anniversary of our biggest information agency, ITAR-TASS.
Это бренд, известный во всем мире.
It is a brand which is famous all over the world,
ТАСС получит новое дыхание, новое развитие,
and I hope that, headed by Mr. Mikhailov,
в
ITAR-TASS
том числе и в работе с вами.
is going to reach a new stage in its development and
То она
is going to expand
представительная по каналам
its contacts with you and with other media agencies.
80%
Speaking about the
всех мировых
agencies
информационных
that are here today, I'd like to emphasize that more than 80% of the world information flow comes from these agencies. And no doubt
трудно переоценить это
that you exercise a big influence
большое, если
on shaping the global information space.
распространяется потом вашими коллегами в различных средствах массовой
Your colleagues from other mass media
информации, в интернете.
spread the information in printed mass media, in the internet, and in other sources. I hope that today,
В ходе общения поговорить
during our discussion, we'll be able to speak on some crucial issues
официальными структурами.
of the current agenda on how we could improve the relations with
Собственно говоря, что я хотел
the Russian public structures and with your colleagues. That's what I wanted to say in my introductory remarks, and now what I suggest is to proceed to free discussion.
мы можем
If you have any questions, I'm ready to answer them.
на ваши вопросы. Пожалуйста, уважаемые коллеги.
Please, the floor is open.
Владимир Владимирович, спасибо большое за возможность.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, thanks a lot for hosting the meeting. I think it would be fair to give the floor to France Press Agency, which is the oldest information agency in France. The floor is yours, please.
Monsieur le Président, vous allez bientôt aller en France pour la commémoration du 70e anniversaire.
Mr. President, you're soon going to visit France for the 70th anniversary of the Allies landing in the Normand. Are you going to host any additional meetings with the heads of state that are going to be present there? And if I'm allowed to say that,
Le président
to ask you another question,
en Ukraine.
Do you believe that the president that is going to be elected in the Ukraine is a legitimate one?
Поездки в Нормандию
First, regarding our visit to Normand,
будет ограничена тем,
it is going to be
ради которой мы все собираемся.
restricted to the
Действительно, президент
theme
Франции
of
подтвердил свое
the meeting,
приглашение.
and the
Конечно,
French
благодарность
president
принята.
has
Во время
confirmed
Второй
his
мировой войны
invitation.
наши
During the
страны
Second
были в
World
одном
War,
строю, боролись с нацизмом.
we were allies
И
and we were fighting together
Вы знаете,
against
что
Nazism.
народы Советского Союза и России
As you know very well, the
на алтаре
peoples
общей
of the
победы
Soviet Union and the people
многое
of Russia
положили,
had sacrificed a
многое
lot
сделали для этой общей победы над
to win the
нацизмом.
war,
Поэтому
to achieve our joint victory over Nazism.
все мы встретимся
And
в
that is
Нормандии.
why it is quite natural that we are going to have a meeting in Normandy,
Нашим союзникам по коалиции
and we are going to pay tribute to our
и
coalition partners, to the British, the American, the French.
о участии
We remember
французов и
the contribution
сопротивлении,
the French
прямом участии
had made to the resistance, and
Второй мировой войны, в том числе и
through the
легендарного
direct participation in the war,
Будут ли
including
в
the
этой связи
Normandy
какие-то встречи?
Nemon.
Насколько я
And
понял,
speaking
президент
about
Франции хотел бы
the meetings
такую
that
встречу
could be held in that regard. As far as I understand, the French president wanted to have an additional meeting to be able to discuss the bilateral issues and issues related to the international agenda. Of course, I am open to any negotiations, and if the schedule of the French president allows that, I'll be delighted to meet him and to discuss the issues of mutual interest. This is the answer for the first part of your question. And speaking about your second question, about whether the president elected in the Ukraine is going to be legitimate, I gave a very detailed answer to that question yesterday. You know, one of your colleagues questioned me very precisely and thoroughly on the issue. I said everything yesterday, but I can repeat that, in my view, it would be much more logical first to deliver on the agreements that were reached on February 21 of the year between the president and the opposition. And I suppose that we should not doubt the very legitimacy from the future, the very legitimacy of the future government of the Ukraine from the very beginning. But an obvious fact is that it is illegitimate to hold presidential elections when there is an acting president of the Ukraine. And it is enshrined in the constitution of the Ukraine. I suppose that first they would have to hold a referendum and then probably to adopt another constitution or another basic government act. And but at the moment, the government of the Ukraine, the people who are in power in the Ukraine at the moment, they want to hold the elections first and to implement changes. What changes they are going to implement is an open question, because it is always a subject to discussion, and it should be discussed and talked about in the society. What I'm thinking about is that people who are now in power in Kiev and the main candidates for the position of the president are different people. And maybe those who are in power are not interested in electing a legitimate president. And we should take into account the internal political struggle that is underway in the Ukraine. Well, anyway, it is mostly related to Ukraine's domestic affairs. What I'd like to emphasize is that we'll treat any choice of the Ukrainian people with due respect.
Pardon, donc si je vous comprends bien, pour vous, le président légitime restera le président Yanukovych, même après l'élection.
If I understood you correctly, you believe that Mr. Yanukovych is the legitimate president of the Ukraine, and he will remain the legitimate president even after the election. I suppose that all of us can read very well. We can just open the Ukrainian constitution and read the text. We are adults. We can read. Just open the constitution of the Ukraine and read it. In the constitution, there are 4 legal ways enshrined
неспособность исполнять
including
обязанности по состоянию здоровья,
death, the incapacity to fulfill the presidential obligation, the
предусмотренного
impeachment
этим
procedure,
Конституцией и законом,
enshrined in the Constitution as well,
личная отставка, которую
and personal resignment. These are four ways
лично
when the president stops being legitimate in his office.
будем придерживаться конституционных норм, или скажем,
I
что это не
suppose
нужно.
that we should either stick to constitutional norms or say that they are
Поэтому
not
моя
important
позиция
at all.
заключается в том, что сначала нужно
But
было
my
решить эту
position
проблему.
is that first we have to address this issue.
Сегодняшние власти в Киеве решили
But
действовать
given
по-другому,
that
ну,
people who are
хорошо,
in
пускай
power
так.
in Kiev
Мы
today
в любом
decided to
случае
take a different
заинтересованы в том,
course of action.
чтобы, были
Let it be
созданы
their way.
условия,
But
направленные на стабилизацию
we
ситуации.
believe that we have to
Ведь, сейчас говорить о чем?
create
О том,
the
что потом будет
favorable conditions for
принято новое
stabilizing the situation. Because at the
А если
moment,
так,
what
то
they do
вновь
means that they are
избираемый
going to
президент,
adopt a new
он может быть
constitution.
переходный какой-то фигурой.
And then maybe the president that is going to be elected now will
Или
be just a
наоборот, он будет
transitional figure.
концентрировать у себя,
Or, on the
максимальные
opposite,
властные
the
полномочия,
president
что,
might be
безусловно, и тот, и другой
trying to
сценарий
concentrate all
будут
the
связаны с
resources.
обострением политической
I
борьбы
suppose that
внутри страны.
both scenarios could lead to aggravation of the political struggle within the country.
Безусловно, я сказал уже, будем уважать выбор украинского
As
народа
I've
и
already
будем
said,
работать.
we are going to treat the choice of the Ukrainian people with due respect, and we are going to work with the authorities that are going to be shaped
основе этих выборов.
based on the elections.
Пожалуйста, коллега из агентства Синьхуа.
Now I'd like to give the floor to our colleagues from Xinhua. It means New China in Russian.
Спросить, вы удовлетворены ответом?
Excuse me, are you satisfied with the answer I gave?
Je suis satisfaite.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Пожалуйста, господин Джо.
谢谢总统先生。正如您昨天讲的，您同习近平主席
First,
上海会晤以及联合声明的发表和一系列重要协议的签署，
My
标志着中俄。
congratulations on the very successful negotiations with Xi Jinping.
您认为中俄两国怎么更好
The
地
joint statement that was adopted says that you've reached
世界稳
new level
基石
in our relations.
和作为
My
经济
question
发展
is
重要动力的作用？
how the Russian-Chinese relations
我想问的就是
can play, as you put it, a bigger role in stabilizing
您认为这对当
the
今世界
relations and the development of both countries.
发展的秩序
My second question is as follows. Do you believe that the 70th anniversary of the victory in the Second World War, what is the
Безусловно,
role of this event in
результаты
today's situation, and how can we celebrate it?
наших встреч
The results of our meeting in
несколько
Shanghai
дней назад и
that took place several days ago,
подписанные документы
and the documents we
говорят
signed
о новом качестве отношений между Китайской Народной
speak for
Республикой и
themselves.
Российской Федерацией.
There is a new quality to the relations between Russia and
В последние
China.
годы, предыдущие годы
During the recent
неоднократно
years,
подчеркивали высокий
we have
уровень
repeatedly
нашего сотрудничества.
emphasized that
Но,
our relations are at a very
вот
high
в эти
level.
дни, прошедшие в Шанхае, и
During
выход
my
на те договоренности,
Stay
которые
in
были
China,
достигнуты, дают нам все
when we
основания
came to the agreements
утверждать, что мы сделали
that you've
еще
just
один
mentioned,
шаг вперед по повышению качества
mean
нашего
that
доверительного диалога
we've reached a new level in our relations.
на
That
новые
our
рубежи
dialogue is
стратегического
indeed based on trust and confidence.
Связано это не только с газовым контрактом.
And it is
хотя
also a
он,
new level of
безусловно,
our
является
strategic
в
partnership.
известной
It is
степени
not only related to the gas
правильным
contract that was signed.
эпохальным. Для нас он сопоставим
Many experts say that
с
it is a
тем
landmark
решением,
in the
которое
history
было
of our
принято в свое
relations.
время в 60-е годы
In our
еще
view, it is
советским
compatible to the
руководством
decision that was
Федеративной
taken in the
Республики Германии,
60s by
связано с известным контрактом
Russia and Germany. I'm referring to very important contract, a well-known contract, gas in exchange to the pipes. At the moment, we produce pipes ourselves, including the big diameter pipes. But for us, the contract with China means an opportunity to access the Asia-Pacific region, the Asian market. And if we have a contract as big as this, which amounts to $400 billion, allows us to make the development of the energy infrastructure in the whole Far East and the Eastern Siberia economically profitable. And that is what means a lot to the Russian Federation. I suppose that for the People's Republic of China, it makes possible decreasing the deficiency of energy resources. And, as I mentioned yesterday, we feel that the heads of the state are concerned with the environmental situation in big cities. As we all know, natural gas is the most environment-friendly energy source. And we do hope that our cooperation will help to protect the environment in the big Chinese cities. However, our next step could be signing a similar agreement on the so-called Western route. Our first contract was on the Eastern route, and the second one is going to be related to the Western route. First, we are going to use the formations Kavikte and Cheenda, where there is 3 trillion cubic meters of gas that could be recovered, and I suppose that they are sufficient for 30 years, and in our assessments, even to 50 years. And speaking about the Western route, we are going to use the resources from other formations. We are going to use the Western Siberia resources for that. The second project is going to be cheaper. And given that the pricing issues and the aspects related to targeting the projects on both sides are going to be functioning very well already. The second project, if it is supported by both Russia and China, is going to be implemented even faster than the Eastern one. But of course it depends on the Audra's will, on China's needs regarding the development of the infrastructure.
But it's not limited to energy, or at least not hydrocarbons. We continue discussions, nuclear, new renewable types of energy, alternative sources that are very promising. That's great importance to cooperation in high-tech areas, be that aviation, outer space exploration, medicine. Both for China and Russia, monetary, financial, currency cooperation are very important. Both Russia and China hold huge golden currency reserves, as we all know. China ranks #1 in terms of its golden currency reserves globally. For us, it's important to place our golden currency reserves in a rational, reasonable, safe way. So we both need to think of the best way to do that, taking into account turbulent scenarios still going on in the global economy. We need to rationally use our resources. Then settlement in national currencies, rubles and Chinese currency. First steps have been done. We'll continue working in the direction we spoke about, boosting cooperation in many sectors: agriculture, general commercial cooperation, regional partnership. We've advanced significantly along all of these lines. I'd like to highlight the personal engagement of Chairman Xi Jinping. It was very much thanks to his personal contribution, his personal support, that the positive outcomes of the visit were possible. Thank you. Next.
Хорошо вам известно, агентство ДПА, 95% информационного рынка
DPA
Германии, все немецкие газеты ежедневно являются подписчиками.
From Germany, 95% of news goes through this news agency. 100% is more like it, and we're very proud of it. I'll try to speak Russian. I appreciate the opportunity to take part in the meeting in the West, in Germany in particular. Many have questions about the policy and reliability of our partnership, about confidence. We spoke a lot about confidence during the forum, talking about gas. Gas is the main area of cooperation between Russia and Germany. Will there be enough gas left for the West? Now that Russia signed a major contract with China, could you elaborate on what that might mean for other projects, South Stream, other lines of Nord Stream, etc.? Will they still be relevant, or are they no longer on top of the agenda? And my second question is, we spoke about Ukraine already. I would like to hear your view on Russian-German relations in that respect. You often talk on the phone with Chancellor Merkel. How would you characterize the behavior of the German government in relation to the Ukrainian conflict? Let me start with the economy. When it comes to cooperation with Chinese friends and partners, European friends and partners, Germany in particular, after the contract with Chinese Republic is fulfilled, it's going to become an equal consumer of Russian gas, equal in volume to Germany. So we're talking about similar volumes. Germany uses about 40 billion cubic meters of our gas per annum, so will China eventually? In case the second project is implemented, the one I referred to just now, the Western route, China will become a strong leader. So the Eastern Corridor, the Eastern route, like I said, I want to make it very clear to everyone. It has nothing to do at all with Russian gas supplies to Europe. We're talking about new gas fields that are located in the south of Yakutia and in Irkutsk region. So far, they have not been used at all. So we'll have to equip them, we'll have to drill, we'll have to build pipelines, all infrastructure, supply power, build roads. It's a major project. Like I said, it's going to be the largest construction project in the world, with a total investment amounting to about $55 billion only from Russia, while Chinese partners will have to invest about 20 billion. So this has nothing to do with Europe whatsoever. As regards the second route, which is still under discussion with our Chinese friends. No contracts have been signed so far. We're still at the discussion stage, although I think the decision will be taken. Well, for this project, resources will come from the Western Siberia, and all Europe, including Germany, gets Russian gas coming from Western Siberia. But here again, there's nothing to worry about, because today, I don't want to confuse details. Gazprom, I think, it extracts 440, 450 billion cubic meters per year, while it is capable to raise production to 650 billion cubic meters. So there are enough resources. We haven't been using them in full, because for a simple reason, we do not have a consumer. But we can raise production dramatically, very rapidly. As regards volumes that will be supplying to China through the Western route, of course it's not, well, we have not agreed on a figure yet. It's not going to be 200 billion. But the increase by this 200 billion will have to cover the needs of China, growing needs of Western partners, and growing needs of the Russian economy. What's of special importance to us, like I said, as soon as we complete the Eastern project, we will be able to interconnect pipelines from the European part of Russia, Western Siberia, and Eastern Siberia in the Far East. And in that case, we would be able to transfer gas from one region of Russia into the other. Transfer gas from European and Far Eastern consumers, all consumers in the Asia-Pacific region. I think that would be an important factor in the global energy. Would help to deal with economic issues easier, not politicize them in any way. We talk a lot about reliability. Back in the Soviet days and the most dire days of the Cold War never disrupted supplies of energy to Europe. Germany is no exception. Russia did the same. The only negative example we had was the 2009 crisis with Ukraine, when it demanded that Russia, without good reason, demanded that Russia reduced prices dramatically and later disrupted our supplies of gas to Ukraine. You can spread the word, you can silence it, and it happens often. It's up to you. But we are interested in supplying our raw materials to bona fide customers that pay contract price. Do you think we'd ever stop supplying gas to Europe? That would go against our own interests. That would be suicidal. But what is it we can do if Ukrainian partners seize gas instead of transporting it? The only thing we could do was stop supplying gas to them, because, one has to pay for what he gets. So the contract is now being questioned again. Signing a new contract was difficult, but you can find the text on the web. It's an open source. It's rather technical, but any literate man can read it and see with his own eyes that Russia is honoring all of its provisions. We haven't violated any single one. And now we hear that there are threats to damage the pipeline, or that there is risk they would refuse to pay. Refuse. They haven't been paying since July last year. Ukrainian partners stopped making regular payments July last year. Now we hear that we need to reduce gas prices. Why? Why must we? It's not in the contract. If we want to play by the market rules, we should honor contractual commitments, and this is what we do. I'm a realistic man. Back in the days, we gave a $100 discount out of 1,000 cubic meters. That was payment for the deployment of our fleet in the Crimea. Okay, someone may refuse to recognize that Crimea joined Russian Federation through democratic procedure, and for some reason refuses to acknowledge the right of the people of Crimea to self-determination. Let us not go deeper into that, but look at what happened. We were supposed to pay for the presence of Russian fleet in Crimea started in the year 2017, because before that date, the agreement between Russia and Ukraine was in effect, and we paid annually $95 million for the deployment of our fleet in Crimea. By the way, we already made a payment. We already made a payment for 2014. We paid the $95 million. And then after 2017, we'd have to deal with payment for the presence of our fleet. So we agreed that we're going to give them a discount, $100 per 1,000 cubic meters, and that this discount will cover the stay of our fleet. But we were not supposed to pay until the year 2017, while we started paying immediately back in 2010. Why? Because Ukrainian friends asked us to do so. They ask us to
поддержки украинской экономики.
provide additional
И вот за
support
это
to the
время,
Ukrainian economy.
2017,
So
18, 19,
2017, 18,
за это
19,
время с 10, 11, 12,
2010, 11,
первый
12,
квартал
13, and
14
first quarter of 14.
мы как бы платили за пребывание
We-
нашего флота в Крыму 3 с лишним года.
For 3.5 years,
Если мы
almost,
исходим из
we
того,
paid
что
for
оплата реальная
the
должна
deployment of
была
our
бы
fleet in the
начаться
Crimea, while according to the agreements that were made, we were supposed to start paying in
18, 19,
2017, which
20
means
и первый квартал
we
21
already
года.
paid for the year 17, 18,
Но и это
19,
даже
and the
еще не
first quarter
Фокус
of
заключается в том,
21st.
что сам
But the
контракт,
trick
к
is,
которому привязан
and now it
этот
gets
скид, он
interesting,
всего-то действует до
that
2019.
the contract
А мы уже 21 захватили.
only is effective until 2019, while we have paid in advance
Мы проявили
for
невиданную
until
щедрость.
2021.
И
So
в
how
высшей
can
степени партнерское
anyone
отношение
reproach us? We've been so generous. We've shown true spirit of partnership when it comes to dealing with our Ukrainian friends.
Вторая, когда мы увидели,
So,
что в прошлом
going to
году
the second part,
ситуация в
when we saw that last year the
экономике
situation in
Украины
the
складывается
Ukrainian
совсем
economy
неблагополучным образом. И с
became
июля,
completely
как я уже сказал,
devastating.
несмотря на очень
Since
добрые
July, like
отношения
I said,
с
despite very
прежним правительством,
good
оно
relations
перестало
we
нам
had
регулярно
with
платить.
the former government, we stopped
В
receiving
соответствии
any
с контрактом
payments
мы могли
for
бы
them.
сразу перейти на предоплату.
In accordance with the contract clause, we could demand prepayment. And it says in the contract,
За следующий мы можем уже
should
вести
authorities fail to pay for the previous months, Russia is entitled to demand prepayment for every next month. So this is very simple.
Мы не стали этого делать.
We demand money first and then we supply gas. We
Исходили из
decided
того,
not
что
to do
нужно
that.
помогать
We thought
клиенту, а не терять его.
instead of losing a client, one has to help the client. So we waited and waited. August, September, October, November,
И никакой оплаты.
and nothing happened. We got no money. Well, at best,
Потом они
partial
обратились к нам
payments.
с просьбой оказать им
Then at some point they
дополнительную
asked for additional
помощь. И
assistance.
попросили первое, дать
First,
кредит
they asked to
первым
provide them a loan,
этапом 3 миллиарда долларов,
3 billion at the first stage,
образовавшиеся задолженности
to pay,
за
to cover the
2015
indebtedness for the year 2013. And they said
трудно платить
it's
даже ту цену,
difficult
которую мы сейчас платим.
to pay even
Просим нам предоставить скидку
the low
еще
price we
минус
have
100
now.
долларов.
So we're asking for an
260
additional
$8,5
discount,
за 1000
an
кубов.
additional $100 discount, so
А мы
it
со своей
amounted
стороны
to
гарантировали, что вот по этой более
$268.5
низкой цене
per
мы
1,000
будем
cubic
регулярно и
meters.
полностью
And they
платить
said,
текущие
if you give us the low price, we can guarantee that we'll pay you in full and timely. Gazprom did agree with partners. They said, okay, we'll do even that, but only
платить регулярно
provided
текущие платежи каждый месяц.
you make regular monthly payments in
В
full.
январе еще заплатили,
We got the money in
в феврале
January.
уже половину,
We got half of the money, or less than half, in February, and we got zero in March.
даже по самым низким тарифам, со всеми скидками.
Even with all the discounts,
Тогда мы им сказали, слушайте, уже новое правительство.
although the
пришло.
tariff was so low, then at that point, new government took office. So we told them, come on, we agreed that unless you pay in full, we'll revoke all discounts. And this is what we did. I want to stress that it's not political. But we cannot supply our resources, our products, free of charge to a country that has 45 million population. Like I said yesterday at the session, we already supplied 9.8 billion cubic meters of gas to Ukraine, free of charge, free of charge.
Это бесплатная поставка. Это столько, сколько мы поставляем в Польшу за целый
It's
год.
the amount we supply to Poland in 12 months.
Просто беспрецедентная какая-то.
This is unprecedented.
Сегодня наши партнеры нам
Today
говорят,
our partners
мы не
tell
будем
us,
платить до тех пор,
we
пока
will
вы
not
опять
pay
не предоставите нам
until you give us
Во-первых,
the
мы не
discount
имеем
back.
права этого
Well,
требовать,
first, they don't have the right to demand a discount.
а он действующий.
The contract that is still in effect does not provide for any discounts. And secondly, we had an agreement. We will give you discounts only providing you make timely payments. But what I'm about to say is going to be even more surprising to you. We told the new authorities, okay, we understand you're in a difficult situation. We're ready to make a step
Мы готовы
forward.
с вами обсудить
We're ready to
вопрос
discuss.
возможного предоставления скидок. Но заплатите нам хотя
discounts,
бы
but
долги,
at least you need to
сложились
pay off the accumulated debt over the period
когда эти скидки действовали
while the discounts were still in effect
до 1
up
апреля
to April
этого года.
1st this year.
Вот вы нас просите низкую цену,
You're asking for a low
но
price.
заплатите нам хотя бы то, что накопилось в
pay
качестве
us.
долга.
At least the accumulated debt over the period while you had all the discounts. Nope,
Отказывается это.
they refused to do that.
Знаете, ну все имеет какие-то пределы.
Come on, there's a limit. There's a limit to
Значит,
everything.
Ну, посмотрим сейчас, что будет происходить после формирования
We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes
нового правительства
after
после выборов.
election,
Но
after
в соответствии с контрактом «Газпром»
new
предупредил,
government takes office. But under contract, the Gazprom already warned partners, and I'm telling this to you, not to be accused that we act as bandits. I sent a letter to many of my fellow leaders
вот
to
недавно
whom we
второе письмо
supply gas. Recently, I sent a second letter
предупреждает о том, что
warning them that under contract, Gazprom is shifting to prepayment
европейских стран
in
мне
settlements
сказали,
with Ukraine. Some of the European leaders told me, please be patient, wait a little while.
Украина сейчас получит
Ukraine is
первый
about
транш
to
от
get
МВФ, они вам заплатят.
the first payment from the IMF, and they'll
Нет,
pay you immediately.
не
But
платят.
no, that didn't
Наши
happen.
деньги 3 миллиарда скушали.
They
$1 не заплатили.
devoured our 3 billion without paying us a single penny. Now they get money from the IMF. Still, we still see
Поэтому
nothing.
Мы готовы к конструктивному
So we're
диалогу.
prepared to engage in constructive dialogue, but
Непонятно, на чем основах требований и ультиматумов, а на основе
we shouldn't
цивилизованной
use the
рыночной работы.
language of ultimatums. We should
Что касается наших отношений
be civilized.
с Федеративной Республикой,
So
они у
when it
нас
comes to cooperation
полномасштабные.
with Germany, we have extensive cooperation.
Считаю, что они очень важны являются. И для
They're also
России,
extremely
и для
important both
Федеративной
for
Республики
Russia
Германии.
and Germany.
Ну, вот по предварительным подсчетам, я уже называл
According to
цифры,
preliminary
за счет
estimates,
сотрудничества между
due to
экономиками
cooperation
России и
between the economies of our two
Республики
countries,
существует 300 тысяч рабочих мест.
300,000 jobs exist in Germany, and this is excluding energy cooperation.
Я глубоко убежден в том, что
So
к
I
ним нужно подходить очень
am and remain convinced that one has to be
и не
very
подвергать их
cautious
текущей политической конъюнктуре.
and not
Еще
subject
неизвестно, кто прав
them to
в
tests and
этих
trials of the
политических
current political
Я
situation,
считаю,
because,
что мы правы.
it's hard to say who's right and who's
Что
wrong
касается
in those political
переговорных
disputes. I think we are
позиций,
right.
наших контактов, они продолжаются с
As
канцлером.
regards negotiations, contacts, we are in touch. I'm in touch with Chancellor Merkel. I have,
Во всяком случае, были и личные, и деловые
or at
отношения.
least had until
Нам
now,
всегда
very
удавалось
good
находить
personal
какие-то
relations with Chancellor
соприкосновения,
Merkel. We were always able
компромиссы,
to
даже по спорным вопросам.
find points of convergence, compromise, even on the most difficult questions, and we're determined to work in a similar fashion in the future. Thank you.
С Европы снова в Азию.
Going back to Asia,
Наши коллеги
Vladimir
из
Vladimirovich,
Индии,
our
чья
Indian
крупнейшее индийское
colleague,
информационное
Major
агентство, господин Чандра, исполнительный редактор
Indian
его,
agency,
он
Mr.
брал
Chandra,
несколько лет назад у вас интервью.
who interviewed you a few years back. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have short questions on Ukraine related to India. The Indian government did not support the sanctions and other measures that the Western governments took. What is your reaction to that? Number two, we have a new government elected in India, and Mr. Narendra Modi was tweeted about Russia. Russia was about his message that he got from you, and he tweeted about it. You were the first country he mentioned. So the Western countries had, US and the Western countries had some reservations about dealing with him. Now they are easing. What is your reaction on that? And number three, on Kudankulam nuclear power project, has all the issues been resolved on 3 and 4 units? The nuclear liability clause, has it been resolved with India? Thank you.
Первое, что касается санкций,
Well, the first, as far as the sanctions are concerned, you know my position. I believe that the sanctions are counterproductive and are not based on any fair
существующим проблемам,
treatment of the existing problems. They are dictated with the desire to impose
такое развитие международных отношений
such a development of international relations on Russia which
соответствует ни международному
does not
праву,
correspond
ни взаимным
to
интересам, даже взаимным.
the international law or to mutual interests or to Russian interests.
Некоторые события,
And
которые происходили на
some
Украине,
events that took place in Ukraine are threatening our
в первую очередь, с точки
interests.
зрения безопасности, имея в виду
First of all,
вступление
security interests. I mean the prospects of Ukraine
Организацию Североатлантического договора,
accessing the NATO,
а за этим может последовать, и я
which
уже
can be
сказал,
followed, and I mentioned that, by not only the accession but also placing the military complexes in the Ukrainian territory and in Crimea. And if that happened, Russia de facto would have serious geopolitical consequences. De facto, it would be
при Черноморье.
squeezed out from the Black Sea region.
Законное право присутствия в
From the
котором
region
боролось не одно столетие.
where Russian fought
И те, кто
for the presence there
провоцировал государственный
for many
переворот,
centuries, and those who provoked the coup d'etat in Kiev
если они действительно являются профессионалами,
should have, if they are professionals, considered the implications of their illegal desires and aspirations. I hope that
тем прецедентом, который
this would be the precedent
имеет
which
свои негативные
has its
последствия,
negative
но все-таки
consequences,
возродит
but which will revive
добросовестное отношение
goodwill and benevolent
нормам международного
and
права,
fair treatment of the international law, and
согласования позиций
to
и учета
agreeing the positions and taking into account the legal interests of each other during talks,
на
and
применение
not
каких-то силовых
through
методов решения спорных вопросов.
using force to solve
А вот
disputable
поддержка
questions.
антиконституционного переворота
And the support of the anti-constitutional coup d'etat is
способ силового решения
a
спорных
solution by force of a
Что
disputable
произошло? Я тебе
question.
рассказывал.
What happened? I
Мы вели
told that yesterday.
достаточно конструктивный,
We
да, сложный,
were in a
но всё-таки
constructive, difficult, but
абсолютно дипломатический
absolutely diplomatic dialogue,
дискуссию.
discussion.
Да, мы убеждали и
We
европейских партнеров,
did
что в таком
convince our
виде,
European
который
partners as
предлагается
well that the form
договор об ассоциации
of this
между Украиной и
association treaty between Ukraine and the EU
для нас
was not
представляет определенную в экономическом плане угрозу.
too good
Мы
for us in the
пытались убедить и
economic
украинскую сторону, и европейскую.
plane. We tried to convince Ukraine and Europe.
Нам прямо сказали, я вчера тоже
but
на дискуссии об этом
They told us
что это не
directly
наше
that
дело.
it was
И
not
что
the business
третья
of
сторона не
ours,
должна участвовать
and that a
во
third country
взаимоотношениях
should
между
not participate
Украиной
in
и
relations
Евросоюзом.
between
Мы
Ukraine and the
пытались
EU. We
доказать,
tried
что бумагами в
to
руках,
prove with
что это не
papers,
так,
with documents, that
что
it is not so, that
входит в зону
Ukraine
свободной торговли
is in a free
на
trade
пространстве
area on the former CIS space, and this
Мы сказали, нет,
damages our direct interests. But they said, no, you are not the participants of this process, we'll not speak with you.
и потом, когда мы всё-таки
And
смогли
afterwards, when we
абсолютно
were
дипломатическим,
able, through
цивилизованным
diplomatic, I
убедить
highlight,
украинское
methods, to
руководство хотя бы
convince
провести
Ukrainian
дополнительные
leadership
переговоры
to
с
at least have additional talks with Brussels.
наши западные
Our
партнеры
Western partners then
способствовали государственному
contributed to the coup d'etat,
перевороту. Это и есть
anti-constitutional coup d'etat in
силовой
Ukraine,
способ решения
and that
спорных
is
вопросов.
solving
Именно
disputable
силовой
issues
способ
by force.
был
And
дан
this
адекватный ответ.
way received reciprocal adequate answer.
Почему? Я уже сказал.
Why?
Это
I
затрагивает
had mentioned that
коренные
already, because that damages
российского народа и
the
российского государства.
historical interests of the
Те люди,
Russian
которые,
people and Russian state in the region.
готовили
And
и
those
совершали
people who prepared and
совершили подобные
committed
действия
such actions should have considered the implications of those. I repeat, there are many negative things in this situation, but I believe that it will serve as a warning and will prevent more serious conflicts and incidents to happen. As far as the position of India is concerned, we are grateful to the Indian leaders and the Indian people for their well-considered position, for the fact that the Indian leaders treated the problem by considering all the components, the historical and political situation, and was driven by this deep analysis, including the understanding of the great importance of Russian-Indian relations. We are grateful to them for that, and on my part, I had told this to the previous Prime Minister, and then I confirmed that, reiterated that with my phone conversation with the newly elected leader. We are going to fulfill all the arrangements and achieved in economy, in humanitarian cooperation, and of course in military technical cooperation as well. We have a lot of cooperation on many areas, and yesterday the representatives of the Indian business told us that the turnover with India is still quite modest, rather modest, and we'll have to develop that and expand it, but the prospects are huge, and we'll do everything to fully use this potential. Thank you. The next participant of our meeting is well known to you, Mr. Vladimirovich Dylan Danishevsky, Associated Press, the US, and the Associated Press Agency celebrates its 170th anniversary in 2 years, and 35 years John was working for that. You're welcome, John. The floor is yours.
Greetings, Mr. President. It has been more than 2 decades since the end of the Soviet Union, and during that time, many roots and shoots of cooperation and contacts have grown between Russia and the United States. Russians are living and doing business in America. American law firms, banks, and oil companies are active here. The world has changed. But now we have this breach over Ukraine. Where do you think we're going? Is it the beginning of a new Cold War? Is that something that needs to be avoided now?
Well, I wouldn't like to think that it is a beginning of a new Cold War, because no one is interested in that, and I think it will not happen. The development of the crisis in Ukraine has not yet stopped. Well, I mean, the way I see it, and as I have explained it to you already, we really have a good toolbox of interaction with the US, but you see, I'd like to be frank with you, John. Those tools are good only when they are really used, applied. If we have some platforms for cooperation, for joint work, those platforms should not be used just for drinking tea or coffee together. These are the platforms to look for solutions and compromises. And if all the bonus of Russia is that she's allowed to sit next to someone and listen to what the others say, this is not the role which Russia can agree to. And I believe that this is the legal perspective, the rightful perspective of this situation. We take into account the interests of our partners always. We always say yes, 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 but there are some red lines which we can't cross. And Ukraine and the Crimea are such a red line. I've said this already, but as you are a representative of one of the largest agencies, I'll repeat. Where are the guarantees that after this coup d'etat, another Orange Revolution that happened in Ukraine, where are the guarantees that Ukraine will not access to NATO tomorrow? No one, and I'd like to highlight that, no one has ever talked with us about that for the last 2 decades. I mean, meaningful dialogue. We've heard just one and the same phrase recorded on the tape. If every people has the right to determine the system of security where it wants to live, and it's none of your concern. Take the missile defense system. We made a lot of suggestions to find compromise, but the answer was still the same. It's not against you. But when we began to show documents which prove that it is against us, because all the missile defense systems which are located in certain areas are covering the launch pads of our ballistic missiles, then the dialogue stops. And the meaningful discussion does not exist. Where is the guarantee that in the Crimea there would not be any missile defense system had not the Crimean people voted for joining Russia? There were no guarantees. So on the one hand, you are right. We have really a lot of tools to look for compromise and dialogue and to find solutions, to look for solutions. But those tools must be used, and not to serve the interests of just one country, but they must be used to look for compromise which would be acceptable for all the participants of this process, with the obligatory respect of the mutual interests of each other. Sorry, we are now 45 minutes on the air. Well, if the colleagues want that, we can continue. On the air. Yes. Anyway, on the air, not on the air, in the recording, as you wish. You're welcome. Well, now Spain. EFE agency, which is rightfully considered the largest agency in the Spanish world. José Antonio Leire, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, querido colega. Señor presidente, de sus palabras deduzco que con relación a las elecciones.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Entiende que no van a resolver demasiado la situación, es decir, que no tiene muchas esperanzas en que esto pueda servir para resolver la situación.
I believe that your countries will hardly rightfully solve the situation if we take into account the elections that will happen tomorrow. Those elections might cause new concerns in the West or some outbreaks in the east of Ukraine. What do you think? Can Russia face isolation, international isolation in this regard? And what do you personally feel? Can there be any isolation of Russia in regard with the elections? Can some political measures be taken against you? Is that possible? Well, in my action, I am guided only by the interests of the people of the Russian state. That's it. And the Russian people's interests demanded a reciprocal, adequate answer to the rude, forceful actions against Russian interests. And our partners should have taken this into account in advance. As far as the isolation is concerned, well, first, we believe that we are right in this dispute, and legally, that is legally and honestly. I have explained my position, and I have given references to the Kosovo president. As you well know, in Kosovo, the question of
государственной независимости был принят
state
парламентом
independence was
этой территории.
solved by the parliament of that territory. And in Crimea,
Решение о
the
государственной
decision to
независимости
announce the independence
было
of state
основано
was
на
based on
всенародном референдуме
the all-people
с вопросом,
referendum,
хотят ли люди
which
оставаться в составе
gave a
Украины
question
или
whether
присоединиться
people
к
want
Российской
to
Федерации.
remain in Ukraine
после
or
того,
join
как
Russia.
подавляющее
And
большинство,
after an
свыше 90%
overwhelming majority, more than 90% of citizens living in the territory, expressed their views on the referendum and said that they wanted to join the Russian Federation, only afterwards the Parliament of Crimea has decided to declare independence.
Обращаю ваше внимание на то,
I'm drawing your attention to the fact
парламент
that
Крыма
the Crimean parliament, which took the decision, was formed on the basis of the Ukrainian law. It was absolutely legitimate,
всех кризисных явлений,
and it was formed before all the crises
смена власти на Украине,
and coup d'etat in Ukraine.
депутатский корпус был сформирован заранее.
So the MPs and the parliament was formed, elected before that. It's a legitimate body and it had full legitimacy in taking such decisions. Of course, we could ignore all that and we could pretend that someone does not understand something or does not notice something, but the law and the right actually is on our side, and no one would convince me that even on the basis of our legal interests and rights and guided by the international law, we should change our position on this matter. That's the first remark. Second, I believe that the isolation of such a country as Russia is immaterial.
Это невозможно.
It's impossible.
И вы, наверное,
And I believe you can analyze who and how treats the situation and who and how treats Russia in modern conditions. Yes, we do have great interest and turnover with the EU, with the US. Well, it's a bit smaller in the US, about $27 billion. But I believe that we could deal a lot of damage to each other. And when there's a difficult situation in the world economy, who needs this damage? You know, now we have a lot of people who have come to our forum, and people understand that our position is fair and just. If you have polls in Europe, I'm not sure that a lot of citizens of the European states would support their leaders. I believe that in Europe, many citizens would support our position. And in the end, people are the source of power. Well, as far as the consequences are concerned, they would be negative for everyone. They would lead European, Russian and global economy to such turbulence which is not of interest to anyone. And besides, of course, there could be damage if, for example, some crazy measures were taken, but I don't see any grounds for that. For example, a package of sanctions was adopted in connection with actions in Crimea. I believe that's not legal, but it has been taken. Now they are saying us, we are waiting for some actions from Russia on Ukraine as such. Which actions?
What have we done in the Ukraine? What can we be held accountable for? First, we heard that there were our special divisions there. Then everyone realized that there were no special divisions. Now they're talking about Russian instructors working there. And then the international community found out that there were no instructors either. What is the problem? Do they want to serve their own interests? Their political and geopolitical interests? We are not going to do that. But what we want to do and are ready to do is to cooperate. We are ready to equal rights cooperation, and I suppose that in the majority of the European states, as well as in the United States, many citizens would stick to our position. And I suppose that many that authorities of most countries do understand the situation, and I hope that they are not committed to confrontation, and I hope that there's no foundation for that. We realize the projects that we don't with other countries. For example, the development of medium and small businesses is a very crucial issue for us, and Italians are leading in this area in Europe and in the world in general. And I suppose that Italy's contribution into this area in Russia is very high. And of course, we are going to support this area of our cooperation, as well as the other aspects, including energy. Ulf asked about the infrastructure projects, including the Nord Stream, the South Stream. Italy is participating in those projects together with Germany and France. Italy is participating in South Stream. Of course, we're going to continue our cooperation. Moreover, if we face any problems related to the implementation of South Stream, and you know, Brussels is always trying to prevent us from implementing that project, we'll be able to consider other options, including transiting gas through countries that are not part of the European Union. The European Union is just then going to get another transit country. I still do not understand why Brussels is doing that. But we are committed to implementing those projects. I'm referring to the Nord Stream and South Stream. You know, we've built the Nord Stream, but Opal is only functioning for 50% of its full capacity. Why? It's just nonsense. We've invested $1 billion into the construction of those pipelines. We brought the pipes to the territory of Germany, and in the territory we can only deliver 50%. We can only use 50% of the capacity of the pipeline. And it was an exception based on the decision of the national government. You know, that sounds nonsense to me. It is very difficult to work in such a situation. But we are certainly going to take every effort to come to an agreement with every partner, including Italy. Thank you. The legendary agency Reuters, at the moment it's Reuters Thomson, one of the biggest world information agencies. It works in 130 countries of the world in 19 languages. Every day they publish about 1,000 photographs. And Paul Ingressa, the editor-in-chief, has the Pulitzer Award. Thank you. The owner of the Pulitzer Prize.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, for having us here today. I must point out that I'm the managing editor, not the editor-in-chief, so I didn't mean to be promoted on the spot. My question is this. Some commentators in the West have said that they believe your ultimate goal is to recreate much of the former Soviet Union, or as much of it as possible. What do you have to say about that?
Вы так понимаете? Да, вы так понимаете, или многие так говорят?
Is it your perception, or are you saying that many say so?
This has been commented fairly widely, not by a majority of commentators, but by some important commentators in the West. In any event, I would just like your thoughts on the issue.
Это ошибочное мнение.
It is a mistake to believe so. It is not only irrelevant to the reality, it is a tool in the information war. They're trying to stick this label on us. They're trying to label us and say that we are trying to restore the empire, the Soviet Union, and to exercise our influence in that territory. It is not true. I've already mentioned that, and I can repeat again. We had never thought about Crimea joining Russia again. You know, probably it may sound trivial, but our special forces are not operating in the Crimea. You know, the way we treat the relations with the countries, with the post-Soviet countries, is absolutely different. You know, Russia was one of the countries that initiated the creation of the Commonwealth of Independent States. We even initiated the independence of former Soviet Union countries
Мы
in the post-Soviet Union territory.
стремимся к чему? Мы стремимся к
What we are
выстраиванию
trying to achieve is to build
интеграционных процессов на постсоветском пространстве. Но не для того,
integration
чтобы
processes
восстановить
in the
СССР.
post-Soviet Union territory. But we are not doing that in order to restore the Soviet Union. We are trying to use the competitive advantage of all the countries, of all the independent states in the territory of the former Soviet Union. Our contacts are based on the common language, the Russian language. We share the infrastructure that we've inherited from a single country. We have common transport and energy infrastructure. We have a very high level of cooperation between our enterprises. And we've achieved a lot in the area of science and education, and we could use all that in order to be successful in the world markets and to increase the welfare of our citizens. I'd like to draw your attention to this fact. In the forthcoming days, we are going to sign the Treaty on the Establishment of the Eurasian Economic Union. Please have a look at the document. Just have a look at the document as experts. Try to be unbiased. Try to analyze the text of the document. Try to analyze what there is in the document, what could be aimed at restoring the empire. Nothing. All the provisions in the treaty are only aimed at strengthening the cooperation in economy. What we are trying to do is to profit from the heritage of the previous generations in order to be more competitive and more successful in addressing the crucial issues. And of course, we are going to continue to do that. And the fact that the Brussels democracy is unwilling to maintain the relations with the Eurasian Economic Union and with the Customs Union is astonishing. I suppose I'm not going to reveal any secret if I say that the leaders in Brussels are always trying to refer some procedural documents and explain that they're not going to negotiate with the Eurasian Economic Union or the Customs Union because the Belarus and Kazakhstan are not yet members to the WTO. But they may always keep them beyond the WTO. I suppose they even do that deliberately. My perception is that in Brussels, in the European Commission, they probably believe that these integration processes could threat their own competitiveness. But I suppose it is a mistake. Their approach should be based not on potential threats, but on the advantages. I suppose that there are some obvious advantages that could be in the cooperation between the Eurasian Economic Union and the European Union. Let me explain why. I suppose that there are more advantages than threats here. Eurasian Economic Union is based on the WTO principles. And it will just make the work of our European countries with Belarus and Kazakhstan even easier, and they will have access to the market that is more than 170 billion people. It is a very big market from the point of view of consumption, and the access to this market will also allow them to solve the energy problems, because Kazakhstan is also an oil and gas producing country. Belarus can also play a big role in those processes, given its geographical location in the very center of the Europe, and it was called the main plant of the USSR. We could probably leave the truisms and try to divide politics from economy. Our colleague from Japan, information agency Kyodo News. Hiroki Sugita, please, the floor is yours.
ロシアと日本との関係に絞ってお話を伺います。先の上海の訪問で、大統領はロシアと中国がですね、戦略的協調関係の新しい段階に達したというふうにおっしゃいました。
You said that Russia and China have achieved a new level in their cooperation. The Prime Minister of Japan, Mr. Abe, would like to achieve a new level of strategic partnership with Russia as well. What is your vision of your possible strategic partnership with Japan? I heard that the president was going to visit Japan in the near future. However, I do not think that something is going to change after the visit, but what do you think could be discussed during the visit? And also, I'd like to raise the issue of the 4 northern islands. You mentioned that you'd like to use the Hikiwake tool so that no one was the winner or the loser in that situation. So could you please comment on the Hikiwake?
Значит, мы уже говорили, и я, и председатель КНДР Си Цзиньпинь, мы не дружим между собой против кого-то.
Chairman Xi Jinping, we're not friends against somebody. We have bilateral relations with China, with Japan. China has bilateral relations with Japan. Your Chinese colleague, by the way, said that we need to remember that it's been 70 years since the World War II ended. It's an important anniversary for all countries that were involved in the tragic events. So we need to look back and cast an objective look at the tragedy. But we're past that. Today we need to move forward. We need to leave past behind. And I would think that it would be counterproductive to say that our relations with any one country should undermine cooperation with any third country. We have no reasons to limit cooperation with Japan, and I can assure you, China is building bilateral cooperation with Japan. Although there are some complications, but neither us nor Chinese would ever condition development of our bilateral agenda on relations with third countries. This never happened and never will. We cooperate as partners. We don't create blocks. All we do is raise our bilateral cooperation to new higher levels. And this is only natural because we supplement each other. And this is natural. Same is true of Japan. Like when I spoke about the islands, let me remind you that at a certain stage, both Russia and Japan decided to freeze negotiations. We resumed negotiations, but after the year 1956 declaration that was, by the way, ratified by the Japanese Parliament and the Supreme Council of the Soviet Union. So let me remind you that the declaration states in Article 9, if I'm not mistaken, that the Soviet Union is ready to consider handing 2 islands over to Japan. It does not mention terms and conditions, does not mention sovereignty. Which country is going to hold sovereignty over the 2 islands? But it does mention this transfer or handing over. But those 2 islands, or the 4 islands, are subject to our negotiations. They are difficult. It's a legacy we got from the past. This issue complicates our relations, and both Japan and Russia sincerely seek solution to the issue. Russia sincerely seeks solution. What would hikiwaki be, the draw be, in this situation? Had I known, we would have signed all papers already. There is no ready-made answer. We will come to a solution, the end of a long process of discussions, but the solution should not undermine interests of either of the parties. It should be an acceptable compromise. That said, neither of the parties should feel it's on the losing side. It's a difficult formula, but if we keep thinking about that, if we keep making small steps towards each other, impossible is nothing. Are we ready to negotiate? Yes, we are. We were surprised to hear recently that Japan decided to join some sanctions. What does that have to do with Japan? I have no clue. And it's suspending negotiations. So we stand ready. Whether Japan is ready, I don't really know. I would ask that question to you. Our Canadian colleagues, Canadian press, Mr. Cook. The agency was founded in 1917, a memorable year for Russia.
Mr. President, it's a privilege to be here today. I wonder if I could turn your attention to the Arctic for a moment. I think we know that the Arctic may contain perhaps a quarter of the world's undiscovered energy resources, so it's obviously a potential source of significant wealth and probably of strategic military importance as well. Canada's government is laying claim to the North Pole, and our Prime Minister has ordered his own government to craft an international claim for the riches of the ocean floor at the North Pole. Russia, too, has made claims of its own regarding sovereignty of the Arctic seabed, and I believe Russia has even planted a titanium flag on the floor of the ocean. Something that I think prompted fairly strong reaction from other nations. But I'd be very interested to hear your view of Canada's sovereignty claims in the Arctic North. And just one other question, if I may. Our government has also been very critical of you and Russia in its handling of the situation in Crimea. Has described it as aggressive and imperialistic, and I'm curious what your response would be to our Prime Minister's characterization and whether you may intend to have any discussions with him in France during the D-Day celebrations. Thank you.
Что касается общения, встреч, если
Well, as regards the meeting, unless anything changes, unless President Hollande makes any change, I will come. And I'm not going to be avoiding any of my colleagues, and I would be happy to speak to any Prime Minister of Canada. Is no exception. Sometimes, to be very frank, I'm puzzled and surprised. Take Canadian government criticizing action of Russia. Look where Canada is and where Russia and Ukraine are. I understand. Some people think globally. But in my view, even the US are sort of distant, geographically speaking, from Ukraine. And neither Canada nor US have any substantial interest in Ukraine, not if compared to Russia. I said that before, but let me repeat. I believe that our partners, the United States, European countries, their actions were cumbersome, illegal. They fueled coup d'etat, and as we see, they created threat to fundamental national interests of the Russian Federation, not only economic, but security interests as well. Because, and we're well aware that after the coup d'etat, suggestions were made to ban languages of national minorities, and then suggestions were made to join NATO. And logical next step would be deploying of NATO forces and offensive capacities. Had that happened, that would create a new reality for us, and that was the reason why we supported the desire of the people of the Crimea to join Russian Federation. My feeling is that colleagues tried to use language of force when dealing with us, and we had to come up with an adequate response. I hope the situation will never, under no circumstances, repeat anywhere in the globe. And going back to the question from my Spanish colleague, I can repeat, we remain convinced, and we think that this is the only correct position, that we acted in full compliance with international law. Article 1.2, if I'm not mistaken, of the UN Charter stipulates very clearly that all nations have right to self-determination. And this is exactly the purpose of the United Nations, to uphold these rights. So we oppose the way of thinking where certain international players would twist the norms of international law to justify their actions, their immediate politically motivated actions. Take Kosovo, when they needed to attain their goals and they referred to the right to self-determination, while Crimea is different, and this time they talk about territorial integrity. It is also one of the concepts inscribed in the UN Charter. But let us agree. Do we stick to one principle, or do we use double standards? Let us not call white black and vice versa. What we call upon is restore the leading role of international law when it comes to regulating international affairs globally. As regards the position of Canada, it is nothing new. Not much different from the position of the US administration, so it comes as no surprise to us. We're ready to engage in discussions with Prime Minister in particular. We discussed a wide range of topics with him on many occasions. Should there be a need and desire, we remain open and ready. When it comes to the Arctic, there are certain mechanisms under the umbrella of the United Nations. And just recently, through these legal procedures under international law, we got recognition of rights of Russian Federation to certain parts of seabed in the Far East, certain parts of the continental shelf. And we use legal mechanisms. We did that in the Far East, we're doing the same in the Arctic, shall do so in the future. If you noticed, we've been negotiating for a long time with Norwegian friends and partners about shelf delimitation in the Barents Sea. Negotiated for some 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. It's always difficult, especially when it comes to hydrocarbons. We did find a compromise in the end of the day to the benefit of both countries, because as a result we were able to start economic activities in the area, and I think this is the way to go in the Arctic. There are various regional mechanisms. I'm going to employ all the tools to reach understanding. As regards the titanium flag on the seabed, It's not the idea of the authorities. It's rather an emotional reaction. I don't see it's too bad. Back in the days, the Americans landed on the moon and installed their titanium flag there. But we're not saying they're claiming the moon. Thank God we're developing outer space cooperation with the United States. Thank you. One more agency, Press Association, Clive Marshall, over to you.
Mr. President, relations between the UK and Russia have sunk to new lows as a result of events in Ukraine. Last week, David Cameron said that Britain needed to prepare for a new and different relationship with Russia. He has supported sanctions, he sent warplanes to the Baltic, and even last week, Prince Charles, the heir to the UK throne, reportedly compared you to Hitler. What are your responses to these comments?
В таких случаях я вспоминаю одно хорошее выражение.
It reminds me of a good
Сердишься, значит, ты не прав. Передайте это и премьер-министру, и принцу Чарльзу.
proverb. You're angry, that means you're wrong. Give my words to Prince Charles. He's been to our country more than once. If indeed he made such a comparison, it is unacceptable. And I'm sure he understands that as a man of manners. I met him personally, as well as other members of the royal family. This is not what monarchs do. But over the past few years, we've seen so much. Nothing surprises me any longer. And I will be guided not but by what they say about me anyway. I will only be guided by the interests of the Russian people. And I hope that our colleagues in Great Britain will keep that in mind and will always remember that when finding solutions to any issues, we're always guided by international law and its norms. So only if we interpret them in a similar fashion, only if we respect international law will we be able to find solution to the most difficult issues. And should our British partners be guided by their national interests, like I do, and not by other reasons, I'm sure this will soon become a thing of the past and we'll be able to continue cooperation, good cooperation like back in the days, or maybe even reach some new heights and could start thinking about what is to be done in the future in order to make our cooperation more efficient.